Hey guys, it's Mr. E here, and today it's time for a little bit of complaining. Today we're going to be complaining specifically about the Havoc modifiers, more like the Havoc modifiers in this particular set. And if you're unaware of Havoc, Havoc is a endgame mode within Darktide that has additional difficulty modifiers thrown on top of the already crazy enemy spawns, and they make the game harder, and they're randomly assigned per mission, although the game only ever has a pool of about 4 to 5 to pull from, and it assigns 2 of them to your map. So that can lead to really bad situations if you get certain modifiers together, which is what we're going to be going over today. But if you've never played Havoc before, let me encourage you here, maybe don't play Havoc with the current set, but wait until this current set of mutators rotates out and we get some more, I don't know, enjoyable stuff, because right now I personally did not really have a great time playing from ranks 30 to 40. It took me a really long time, and playing with, random people from my stream and from Party Finder, these are capable players for the most part, and even we were getting very frustrated with the stuff the game is pulling currently. So that's what I'm going to be going over here in the video, is why that is so frustrating. And so if you are a person who's eager to jump into Havoc, go ahead and try it out. But if you're feeling frustrated too, just know that it's not you, it's even us experienced players as well, who are getting a little bit irritated, a little bit sore due to the repeated poundings we're taking from some very unfortunate choices. And hopefully we can get Fat Shark to take a look at this and reassess the balance of power that is being given out here. So let's go ahead and break down the 2 mutators that I think are really at fault. We've already had a video in the past. If you didn't check it out, I'll link it in the description, but here it is here. The fuck pink, or whatever that says, who knows what that word is there. Pink is a modifier within Havoc that heals enemies around them. So for obvious reasons, that is a problem, because if you can't kill a target outright, pink on its own can snowball a situation. And if you are unable, if you're just like, for instance, a single man left to clutch a whole game, you can't kill everything, right? Because you need to first surgically extract the one pink enemy, and then you got to kill everything else around them. But usually the game does not allow you to do that. It kind of hides the pink enemy among the crowd, and it's really hard to pick them out. So that's its own problem. But now we have 2 other mutators that have been added and are running concurrently to this pink one. So you can get an additional one plus pink, or you can get these 2 together. There's only one other mutator in the pool right now, so odds are you're gonna get 2 out of these terrible ones most of your games. So the first mutator I want to take a look at that is a really big problem is stims, contaminated stims. Now how this works is our different types of enemies have a different chance to use these stims once they have aggroed onto a player. So what you'll see is, like, when you run up to enemies, they'll start attacking, or you'll attack them, and then they'll just inject themselves with a stim out of nowhere. It looks really weird. I think that could use like a sort of a polish pass to make it not look so jank, because you'll like smash a crusher in the face, he'll be staggered backwards, and then he'll like snap his spine back into place, and he'll shoot a little needle in his arm. The stims that the chances of enemies applying them are, as you can see here, 20% chance for captains. That is very rare, but when it does happen, it can be really obnoxious, especially for certain types of stims. And then we got 30% chance on all these enemies here. Note that this one, the plasma gunner here, has this little asterisk next to it. We'll come back to this in a second. Ragers get a 40% chance, which is one of the worst offenders of this issue. And these shooters and stuff, we really don't care about them too much. They're not that scary, but they have a 50% chance to use it. But the Ragers are the really scary one, which we'll come back to and talk about in a second. And note that this right here, that double star, the plasma gunner can't use the yellow stim on himself. And this is really important. We'll get to what the yellow stim does, but it means that Fat Shark has it well within their ability to code this so that certain enemies can't use certain stims, right? It must be very easy for them to do. So they could assign that, they could use that capability of being able to say, nope, plasma gunner can't use yellow, to tell certain enemies they can't use certain stims. And that is going to be my recommendation at the end here. Now I'm going to skip past the first stim. If you've heard me complaining about this on stream, you already know what it is, but we'll come back to it at the end for those of you who are uninitiated to what is ultimately the the death of many runs. So one of the stims, there are 4 stims, the same stims you can use in the game, but they have different effects to the enemies: green, yellow, red, and blue. Green stims make the enemies' eyes green. They get some little green particles around them, but when they stim themselves, they get an extra amount of health. And you can see when you're playing in Havoc, most players, I believe, at this point are in this 21 to 40 rank. So if you're playing on Damnation difficulty, Havoc, or above, which is where that starts at 21, your enemy basically doubles their HP, right? Which seems like a lot, but really it's not all that much. What it does is it adds this as a healing pool. So effectively, they don't gain extra max health, so you can still kill them in one shot if they're green, if you could kill them in one shot before. But if you lower them to half HP, they will heal for that half of their HP. You could lower them to 1% and they'll heal all the way up to full from there, and then they'll be pretty much out of juice. They'll have 1% left, right? So they'll get 100% max HP sort of in their system that will heal off any damage they take, which is fine. I think that seems fair and balanced, and it also prevents them. It doesn't prevent you from one-shotting them if you could one-shot them before. The other thing it does is it reduces incoming damage from damage over time effects by 50%, burns, bleeds, and electrocutions. Now, the most notable one of those is definitely going to be those warp attacks like Warp Fire, Soul Blaze. The Flame Staff Psyker is everywhere, and that guy would absolutely melt these, right? His Flame Stacks could kill one of these guys in a split second. It wouldn't really matter. The regenerative effect would never have a chance to kick in, and so they've reduced the damage over time effect by 50% and the direct warp attacks by 50%. So these enemies actually operate as a little bit of a hard counter, a soft counter, we'll say, to some of those warp attacks, even though it's not that big a deal, right? Because they still have only the normal amount of HP. They can regenerate their HP, but only for a while. And once they lose all of this HP, then they lose that incoming damage from warp attacks and dot reduction effect. So this can wear off pretty damn easily. And they also makes them harder to stagger. So when you hit them, they get minus 100% impact. So whatever your impact rating is, if you're just going with normal levels of impact, like you don't have any boosts in your talent tree or on your weapon, you're not going to stagger them. But if you're something like an Ogren, or you have some like Hammer Blow or Thunderstrike or whatever it is, as they say down here, extra stagger potential in your talent tree, that will still push over that 100% limit, and so they can still be staggered. So that's what green stims do. Not bad unless you are like a Flame Staff Psyker, and then they're going to take a little bit extra time to kill. Red stims down here make the enemies red, and they have red eyes, you might imagine. And the red eyes, White Dragon, make them have 40% increased melee attack animation, and this just makes them attack really fast, right? For melee attackers, so they'll just swing like way faster than you expect them to. It also, apparently they say that it stacks or has a reduced stagger duration, but in my experience, as they say here, this effect is arguably bugged and does not apply. I don't think I've ever noticed a 90% reduced stagger duration out of these enemies. But as noted, these enemies here don't get any sort of defensive buffs, so oftentimes they are just going to die before they get a chance to really show off that they are stagger reduced. And it also allows the enemy to select any of their attacks at all times, regardless of player intensity status. Effectively, what this means is like, okay, there are certain enemies that will, like a Crusher, right? He drops his overhead sometimes, but with this stim, he'll drop it every single time. Or the Rager, who will use his most offensive attack, where he slashes multiple times every single time. Usually they just choose the highest, craziest attack, and they just use that repeatedly. Then we've got the yellow stims. This one's really kind of like boring and whatever, but like if you're not paying attention to an enemy, they can absolutely blow you up with this on. Then they've got yellow stims. Yellow stims have an upside and a downside. So they make first of all, they get the yellow eyes, and then they get incoming damage reduced by 35%, but they take 300% increased weak spot damage. So they get a huge increase to getting hit in the head, and they get a reduction of damage to elsewhere by 35%, and at the same time they get a ranged and melee attack animation speed increased by 30%. So this is why the plasma gunner can't use a 30% stim here, because they don't want that guy shooting 30% faster. That would kind of undo all the changes they made to fix this guy so far to not make him stupid. It also increases the number of shots fired per shooting action by 400%, which doesn't apply to shotgun blasts. And this stacks multiplicatively with a hidden Havoc modifier that buffs enemy range attacks, which is part of the Emperor's Water Fading Light. So yeah, look at this. A Scab Stalker in a Havoc 37 mission can fire 9 shots per action, but if it's Stim, the same Scab Stalker will fire 45 shots per action, which is very funny to see. Like, they'll just go absolutely crazy. Like, it's very, very funny. And they're shooting 30% faster than normal. So these guys, like, if you're not noticing where they are and they start to shoot on you, especially if you're standing still, they'll absolutely annihilate you. And this is fine usually because they are very, very weak to weak spot damage, and they'll die in one hit. And that includes gunners and all that sort of stuff too. The enemy hit mass is for these enemies goes up by 50%, so you can't cleave them as easily, and they have 50% reduced stagger values. But oftentimes these things don't really matter that much because, again, that increased weak spot damage makes them very, very frail. So this kind of turns them into a glass cannon that allows them to just like blow up targets. But at the same time, it has that that glass half of it there. Now, let's talk about the last mutator here, the last stim, which is the blue stim. The blue stim is the reason why stims as a modifier, as a mutator, are currently broken and really need a overhaul before they should be allowed back in the Havoc mutator rotation. So the blue stim, what it does is, first of all, it adds these blue effects to enemies' eyes, and it changes their base armor type and any applicable armor hit zone override to Carapace. So effectively, these enemies start taking way less damage from attacks already. Their base armor types, so like if you have calculations where, oh, this is a flak armored enemy, this is an unarmored enemy type, and you've got your staff or your gun who's formulated to kill them, well, now no longer do they count as that, and they now count as Carapace. So it armor type swaps them. Then it reduces their incoming damage by 80% for enemies with base armor types of Infested, or Maniac, or Unarmored, or Unyielding. So this includes all like little trash enemies. This include, which can't use it, so I can't think of any infested enemies. Post in the comments if you know an infested enemy that isn't one of the little trash guys who can't even use a stim. Maniacs, unarmored and unyielding. So this is Ragers. This is like regular Dreg, like melee dudes. And this is like Reapers and Bulwarks. So these enemies, especially Maniacs and Unyielding, are a problem because this is a incoming damage reduction. Not a damage reduction, it's like an incoming damage reduction. So this operates in the same way that Castigator Stance does on the Arbitrator. And if you've ever activated Castigator Stance, you know damn well how invincible that shit makes you, right? Having a damage reduction of 80% off the top means that any further damage reduction comes after that, and then they take almost nothing. So these enemies, the Ragers and Bulwarks that have this blue stim on them, are now taking 5 times damage. Let's review what the green stim did for a second. The green stim gives you a 100% extra max health pool that when you get hurt, you heal for that. So if you've got a Rager and you hit him for 75% of his HP, and you don't hit him again for a second, he'll heal that off. But if you hit him again, now he only can replenish 25% more. So at maximum, this doubles their health, right? At maximum, if you're not killing them fast enough to stop the healing. This, no matter how fast you deal the damage or whatever, pentuples their health effectively, right? They take 5 times more damage to kill. Now, this is for these types of enemies. For enemies that are flak armored and Carapace base type, so this is going to be Maulers, this is going to be Crushers, they gain 60%, right? So that's still a massive, massive amount of damage reduction. This is going to 2.5x their HP values. So a Crusher, effectively with a 6,500, let's do some math here, with 6,500 HP is going to go up to an effective health value of 16,250 HP. But this also stacks additively with the same damage reduction buff from Toxic Gas. So when we check out, is it up here for my, I love this guide, by the way, whoever made this, put this together. Where would it be? Anyway, I believe toxic gas gives 20%. I'm not gonna bother like trying to dig for that right now, but it gives it 20%. So for carapace armored enemies, if they happen to wander through toxic gas, they now get that 5 times damage increase. So like a crusher who walks into toxic gas, or God forbid you're on a pox gas map, has his 6,500 HP multiplied by 5. So he now ends up having roughly a third of the health of a boss. And of course, at the same time, this also has a impact modifier of minus 200%. So this makes these enemies literally almost impossible to stagger. There's very, very few weapons and sort of abilities in the game that can stagger these enemies, and that is pretty much only the hard-coded ones. So like the Ogryn's Charge or the Arbitrator's Shield Bash or whatever, those abilities that pretty much guarantee a knockdown, right? Those abilities will still knock these enemies down, but pretty much nothing else will. It also makes them, since you can use a stim, by the way, I forgot to mention, enemies stimming, they can use that while they're already stunned. So what you'll do is you'll drop down a shock mine, or you'll have these enemies smited, and then they'll break free of that to stim themselves, and if they happen to choose the blue stim, now they have an impact or a stun modifier of minus 200%, and they just ignore the shock mine. They ignore the smite, and they walk straight towards you. Right, I mentioned that these crushers, when they're in the pox gas, if they happen to get a little whiff of pox gas has a duration, right, by the way. When they get a whiff of it, it lasts for, I think, 5 seconds on the enemy. 5 seconds can be a long time, but the pox gas wears off. The blue stim doesn't, by the way. The blue stim lasts until the enemy dies, so you cannot wait this out. They, effectively, if they choose the blue stim, they choose to pentuple their health. Now, the problem, another really, really big problem that I do not think Fat Shark realized when they made this how it is that the first damage reducer for Infested Maniac and Unarmored Unyielding is 80%, and then Pox Gas is 20%, and these two are additive. So when you have 100% damage reduction on these enemy types, they literally can't take any damage. So when you have Infested or a Maniac or Unarmored or Unyielding enemies that happen to walk into Pox Gas and they've chosen the blue stim, they are now invulnerable to all damage while that Pox Gas effect is on them, which is problematic when they're a Rager and they're trying to murder you, right? So that is a really, really, really big problem, right? It's because they can't be staggered due to this down here. They're just going to close the gap on you because they're super, super fast. They're going to run up on you, and they're going to beat you to death in 2 seconds because you can't stagger them. You can't push them back. You can only block or dodge, and that's probably not going to happen in most situations because you're usually busy with other stuff, and you just like have this guy walk up to you who just will not fuck off. Okay, so I think for obvious reasons, Blue Stim should be jumping out to you as a huge overperformer out of these 4 colors, to the point where this mutator would be a very, very manageable, probably one of the better mutators in the game in terms of like, oh shit, I can win this game, except for blue. Blue stims, this mutator is more or less a roulette wheel. It's a 1 in 4, it's a Russian roulette. If the enemy chooses blue as their stim, you just go, oh fuck. And since it is random, you can have hordes where no enemies choose the blue stim, and it's perfectly fine. Or you can have a horde where the enemies come in and immediately 4 or 5 of their frontliners, like their metal or whatever, choose blue stims, and now you have to completely give up your position because these enemies have 2.5 to 5x the HP, and they're unstaggerable, and they're going to try to drop overheads on you and murder you. So this is a huge problem. Now this problem is only compounded by the next one I want to talk about, which is, of course, Rotten Armor. And I think that many of you, this is probably the least favorite mutator for many of you, myself included. You know, pink can pose its own problems, but pink at least causes you can like deal with massive hordes of nonsense that are buffed by pink. Because if you get rid of the pink enemies, the other enemies aren't that numerous and aren't that durable. But Rotten Armor is a really, really big issue because remember in the update, the last update, Bound by Duty, we had this change to the Crusher, right? He went from having 3,500 HP or whatever it was to 6,500. And this nearly doubled his HP, but they said to compensate for this, they have the spawn rates of the Crushers, which in Havoc, That's great, right? Because there's already so many enemies out there, we couldn't deal with it. Well, unfortunately, what Rotten Armor does as a modifier, if you see down here, it says it adds trickle horde waves composed of the Rotten Armor breed types. So what this does is when you're playing a mission, whenever there's hordes that spawn in, it force spawns a big ass pack of Crushers, Maulers, and Ragers that are all the Carapace armored type, the Scab armored type. So you're just getting a bunch of extra Crushers added into the mix, even though the Crusher numbers are supposed to be reduced. It's just force spawns. So we get 5, 6 Crushers at a time, and it's not just one wave usually, it's multiple waves. So you get 5 or 6 Crushers dumped on you. That can be, 30,000 plus HP you gotta go through, and these Crushers have apparently a reduced movement speed of 15%, but I don't think that's true. Like I say, they seem just as fast as they've ever been. But the more important thing here is they have this table going for them right here. When the enemies are at different health values, they take different amounts of damage. Now, as it says here, the scaling is currently bugged and stops at 50% damage reduction, but let me just show you what this effect has, because we're going to talk about just straight up DPS, but then we're going to talk about like how this impacts your gameplay. So first of all, let's assume we have a 1000 health enemy, and we're going to deal 100 damage per second, right? So if we did that, we would take 10 seconds to kill this enemy, right? So let's assume that's the enemy we're talking about here. Remember, this only applies to ranged damage. So we're shooting them with our las gun, we're shooting them with our bolt gun or whatever, our staff or whatever it is. It would take us 10 seconds to kill this enemy. Now that's a long time in Darktide terms, this is hypothetical. Now, if we follow this table, and granted it stops at 50% damage reduction, so if we follow this table, everything above 75% HP, so from 100% to 75% HP is going to be 50% reduced. Effectively, you're going to do half damage. Therefore, the time it will take you to lower to this health threshold of 75% will be doubled. So instead of taking 2.5 seconds out of that 10 seconds to get 75% HP, it'll now take you 5 seconds. Then from the next, from 75% HP to 50% HP, it's reduced by 25%. So instead of taking us only 2.5 seconds here, it's going to take us, I believe it's going to be like 4.125 or something, right? 2.5 times 1.25. Yeah, 3.125. And then that's going to add to this. So we're going to take 8.125 seconds to get them to half HP. And then in that last 50% of the HP, it's going to increase the range damage they take by a quarter. So instead of taking 5 seconds to get through this, it's going to take 4 seconds to get through this. And that is going to add 4 seconds. So you can see now here, these enemies have been granted a 20-ish% health increase or durability increase against range damage, just, up front. Now, here's the problem with this, because a lot of this was made up for the fact that they get this boost to range damage when they're below 50%. But these enemies aren't standing still, right? They see you, they know where you live, and they are coming at you, and they're going to kill you. They're all melee enemies. So they are going to close the gap on you and put you into melee range to the point where this range attack buff isn't going to matter, because once they're below 50% HP, you're probably already engaged in melee with them, and they don't get any buff to melee increases. So what this armor type, what this table here allows them to do is they can spend the first 25% of their HP. Their first 25% of their HP is effectively doubled, right? That first 25% of their HP is their buffer, during which time they can close the gap on you because you cannot hurt them. You can't get rid of their HP fast enough to stop them from getting to you. And that allows these massive, massive packs of armor to close the gap on otherwise teams that are trying to hold them back and get onto your range attackers. Usually your range attackers will see this coming a mile away and be like, all right, blast them down before they can get to us. Nope, not the case here. They get up on top of you and they start to drop those overheads. Now, you might be thinking, this doesn't sound that bad, right? Because this honestly kind of sounds like game design. They don't want their massive packs of melee enemies to get blown up at range by artillery fire. They want you to have to hold them back and deal with that and do that stuff. That's all fine and dandy. But now remember that this mutator exists in a pool with 2 other mutators that can absolutely break this wide open. Let's first talk about pink enemies. If there happens to be a pink enemy that spawns in with this pack, now, if this pink enemy is with them and you don't eliminate them first, if you hurt them and knock them below 75% HP, well, guess what? They're going to heal back up and they're going to extend that HP. So effectively, all range damage done to this non-pink enemy is going to be reduced by half forever, as long as they're being healed up. So they're absolutely going to get up on your ass and murder you. And then the even worse one is if it happens to roll with stims and these enemies, any of them, choose the blue stim, because these enemies now, they are carapace armor types, right? They are going to fall into this category, but they have 60% reduced damage and they take half range damage. So they are only going to be taking 20% range damage from your attacks, so you cannot range attack them down at all if they're blue stimmed. And this also means that they cannot be CC'd. So remember, before, these enemies, you could at least hold them back with your melee frontliners getting up there and being like, stop, in the name of law, stop right there while my ranged attackers burn you down, or while I work you down. But these enemies now end up having not only a tremendously boost range durability, but now they have a increased durability overall. They're impossible to stagger, and they just walk right through your front line, or they'll overhead your front line, and they'll make a beeline for your ranged attackers and just rout the team. It isn't impossible to deal with. That's not what I'm saying here. But what I am saying, and this will be where I wrap it up, what I am saying is that these sets of mutators like Rotten Armor, mutators like specifically the blue stim, mutators like, hopefully I can pull it up here, I'll note when I see it, there it is, Encroaching Garden, right? These effects, they just add meat to the meatball. They just make a death ball. Every time they occur on the map, it turns from being an interesting challenge for players to navigate and think, oh my gosh, the game just added this to the mix. How am I going to deal with this sort of modifier being in my Havoc game? And it ends up becoming more, do we have enough damage to overcome what the game is throwing at us right now? And what I've found in my games playing with many players out there, many common folk players, is that the answer is just barely. And if you lose one player, a lot of times you're up shit's creek. You're just fucked, because you can't upkeep the amount of DPS that it's required to get rid of these massive hordes of metal that, remember, when you are playing with Rotten Armor, the normal hordes in the game and the bosses and stuff is already still spawning. And then you're getting bonus crushers, bonus maulers, bonus ragers on top of all that stuff, which can obviously get the effects of the other modifiers on the map. And of course, remember, pox gas, pox gas bombers are still out there infusing them as well. So that can also happen. So that stuff all works together to just make the enemies so beefy. So there's so much HP, there's so much healing, there's so much durability going on, there's so little stagger, that if every player of the team isn't absolutely pumping damage at every possible second, if you aren't in complete cohesion to overcome this massive threshold, if you aren't keeping the enemies under control and their numbers in control, they'll overwhelm you and the game is over. And that happened to me, and I'm certain it's happened to many players over and over again. And it's just frustrating to the point where you can't play with certain builds. You cannot have games, you cannot have teams where you don't have consistent massive AoE destruction in the form of flame staff or grenades. You have to be running veteran with crack grenades in half of these games with carapace, because there's just so many of these enemies. You have to remove some of them. And it just forces certain play types. It forces everybody to have to be the absolute god gamer in order to participate. Because, if you're downed, if you're trying to 3-man this, it's very difficult. And if you're trying to 2-man it, you better hope and pray that the game doesn't decide to spawn a massive horde wave on you there, because you're just not clearing it. There's just too much stuff for 99.99% of players. And that's the fatal flaw that I think there is with this current situation with Havoc, this current rotation of mutators. I really like, and I see it right here in the bottom of the guide, this is my favorite mutator. If those of you out there who are wondering, I know it's bugged and I've complained about it before in the past, but Heinous Rituals is by far my favorite mutator that's ever been in the game, because this, notably, this mutator just adds rituals that summon demon hosts to the map. It doesn't say that, oh, and by the way, every enemy on the map gets 50% more HP. It doesn't make them deal more damage. No, there's just a ritual that you can see on the map that has a timer, and it makes you as the player make a very interesting decision. When are we going to pull the trigger and push ahead and clear out this demon host, and how much enemy aggro are we going to draw by going forward to clear this thing out? Like, how much time can we waste before we pull the trigger, and what's our game plan going to be what's our game plan going to be going forward? And I think that's a really, really interesting predicament to throw the players into. It can also lead to some very, very chaotic moments when you're running low on that timer, or perhaps even the timer expires and you get the demon host summoned in on you. That is not the same as these things, right? These are just, here's some more fucking beef, dude. Hope you brought the fucking gas. Hope you brought the plasma gun and the dueling sword and the flame staff and the rumbler in order to overcome this shit, because otherwise you're just gonna get absolutely mogged. And I don't think that's fun. So what I'm saying is, we need to revisit. Darktide needs, or Fat Shark needs to revisit Contaminated Stims and nerf the fuck out of Blue Stim. They also need to definitely touch up how much rotten armor is spawning in with these, and more importantly, just make it so certain enemies can't Blue Stim, and also make it so, like, you know, these mutators don't occur together in the future, because I think they're just super unfun and they're super lame to play around. And I think that's all I have to say for today. Let me know if you agree down in the comments. Like and subscribe if you got this far, and appreciate you for watching. Bye, guys.